Here's everything you might have missed in Loki Episode 3. It's your Loki Day, Marvel fans, because the third episode of the God of Mischief's eponymous Disney Plus series titled Lamentis delivered some unexpected lore, shocking twists, and a seriously delightful amount of banter following the utter chaos of Lady Loki's sacred timeline bombing in Episode 2. Now we're going to go through the episode carefully to put all of those Easter eggs, comic book connections, and hidden details that you might have missed under the proverbial microscope, but as always, if you prefer to read all about it, we've got you covered over on Nerdist.com. However, to discuss this episode in detail, we obviously need to spoil what happens. So if you haven't seen Episode 3 yet, leave now or forfeit your right to act like it's the end of the world.
Is that a bit of a spoiler for you? Sorry about that.
Alright, let's get into it, shall we? Episode 3, Lamentis, picks up both before and after the end of Episode 2 to provide some valuable context about Lady Loki's plans, who she really is, and some shocking revelations about the Time Variance Authority. And we also get to see fantastic chemistry between Tom Hiddleston and Sophia DiMartino as these two different Loki variants who reluctantly realize they need each other if they want to survive this thing in one piece. Now, the title of the episode itself is actually an Easter egg. Lamentis is a Kree outworld on the very edges of Kree space that first appeared in 2007's Annihilation Conquest Prologue #1. And while I don't expect to see Quasar or the Nega Band show up anytime soon, it's a fun detail nonetheless, and the color palette of the planet from the comics carries over to the show. The episode begins on a much more curious note with Lady Loki, or Sylvie as we'll learn she prefers to be called, confirmed by that Sylvie Laufeystatter detail from a dossier in last week's episode. She's having margaritas with Hunter C20, played by Sasha Lane, while Hayley Kiyoko's Demons plays in the background. At least C20 thinks she's having margaritas when really what's happening is a fantasy that Sylvie is projecting into her mind while enchanting her in real life so Sylvie can interrogate C20 about the true location of the Timekeepers inside the TVA. And this lends further credence to the idea that this is a version of Loki who's a blend of Lady Loki and Sylvie Lushton / the Enchantress from the comics. Plus, it's just a fitting song choice considering the chorus repeats the phrase, "Please forgive me, I've got demons in my head." Well, not demons, green wiggly woos as opposed to Wanda Maximoff's red wiggly woos. By the way, for the record, a brain freeze is essentially a short-term headache caused by sudden temperature change in your mouth and throat, which rapidly constricts and expands your blood vessels. That in turn triggers a pain response from your trigeminal nerve that carries intense sensations to your brain in response to extreme stimuli, like an ice-cold margarita or a god of mischief manipulating your memories. Anyway, back in the Roxcart store in Alabama circa 2050, Sylvie learned those gold elevators in the Time Variance Authority lead directly to the Timekeepers. And that keeps up with this whole Wizard of Oz parallel we have going here. It's a yellow brick elevator to reveal who's behind that curtain. After the title sequence, we see Sylvie infiltrate the TVA, and upon realizing her magic is no good here, she beats the living crap out of some poor unsuspecting Minutemen, dissolving at least 2 in the process with their own energy truncheons. Now, a loudspeaker summons all Minutemen to the armory to protect the sacred timeline, which is actively exploding with dozens of new branch timelines after Episode 2, which makes this the perfect time to attack. Now, our Loki, L113, follows shortly thereafter and remembers his trusty twin daggers are conveniently stashed in Mobius's locker, which he then retrieves and flips in a signature way like he does in Thor Ragnarok. The Lokis do righteous battle in front of the aforementioned golden elevator, which looks like the same one that Loki rode with Mobius previously. It's flanked by a pair of TVA murals, one featuring the agency logo and a clock, the other with the Timekeepers. And while I don't think that Loki's making a subtle Who Framed Roger Rabbit reference when he tells Sylvie that she lacks vision, that movie is burned into my brain for all time, always, so here we are.
You lack vision.
You lack vision.
But if she is really lacking vision, I don't know, maybe Sylvie should change her name to Wanda instead. I said! Their fight is interrupted by Judge Renslayer and a pair of hunters who try to murder the Lokis in lukewarm blood, but they're thwarted when our Loki opens a time door using the TVA's trusty remote control device that we now know is called a Tempad. They land in a makeshift mining facility where their fight continues. And like in the Roxcart store in Episode 2, Sylvie once again objects to being called a Loki as they squabble over control of the Tempad before they're ultimately interrupted by falling space debris. As it turns out, they arrived on Lamentis 1 in the year 2077, only to find out that not only are they smack dab in the middle of an apocalypse event, but it's the worst apocalypse event of them all, which is really saying something.
Of all of the apocalypses saved on that Tempad, this is the worst!
Yeah, it's pretty bad out there. Almost as bad as Cyberpunk 2077 on a base PS4. And remember how much damage Thanos caused with the moon on Titan? Well, this is worse than that. And to make matters worse still, the Tempad is out of juice, so they need to find a way to recharge it if they ever want to survive to destroy the TVA another day, which Sylvie very much wants because she's been planning that for years. Sylvie tries and fails to enchant Loki because, according to Loki, his mind is just too handsome and strong.
I am smart. I know.
And while willpower definitely plays a role here, I do have a feeling it has more to do with them being roughly equal in power level considering their variants of each other.
What are you doing?
What are you doing?
And speaking of power, they reluctantly accept that they do in fact need one another to find more juice for the temp pad, and then they get down to basically bantering for the rest of the episode. We learn that Sylvie no longer identifies as Loki and prefers to go by her chosen name, and I've seen some folks out there speculating that she isn't a Loki variant at all, but I still maintain that she's a combination of Loki and Enchantress from the comics. Sylvie also smartly cuts Loki down a peg, calling him out on his assertion that independence, authority, and style are what defines a Loki, because after all, he's working for the boring, oppressive Time Police. Sylvie's plan is to destroy the Time Variance Authority, create a power vacuum, and then just walk away. At least that's how it seems to Loki and us. It's honestly a nice way for the show to dance around its overarching, ongoing debate about the nature of free will, order, and chaos. Loki doesn't know what he wants because he's an agent of chaos, and he's trying to harness the unharnessable to exert control over his life. And while Sylvie might not have a Thanos-level endgame in mind, she does have a single-minded focus, unlike a certain Loki I could name. It's Loki. Now, the abandoned mining village looks straight out of Borderlands or the Outer Worlds with its large signage, rusted buildings, and space western aesthetic. As for the signs, my first guess was that they're in Cree given the Lamentis of it all, but honestly it kind of looks like stylized Cyrillic. So if you know what these signs actually say, please let us know in the comments below, because my sleep-addled brain could not decipher them just yet. What I can decipher, though, is that there are posters in this town for the Ark, the rocket ship leaving the planet intended to preserve the last vestiges of Lamentian life. But unfortunately for the Lamentians, that Ark is also the best chance of finding enough power to recharge the temp pad so our heroes can escape. So will the Lamentians all die? I mean, yes, but they were gonna die anyway, so no harm, no foul, am I right? Huh? Anyway, Loki and Sylvie wander onto the set of The Mandalorian or something to try and trick a settler woman to giving them power and or information. She falls for neither Sylvie's brute force attempt nor Loki's shapeshifting to look like her mean dead husband, Patrice, and she blasts them both with a space rifle that would make Rocket Raccoon drool with envy.
Oh, yeah.
The woman calls them both devils, and while Sylvie's horns do make her a dead ringer for a certain 16th century stained glass in a French church, they're no Mephistos. And speaking of devilish tricks, the writing on the wall of the Lamentian woman's home looks awfully similar to the Krakoan language from House of X and Powers of X, but sadly, X does not mark the spot, and I'm just way too sleepy. Moving on, Loki and Sylvie try to sneak their way onto a train, walking past common folks in purple work gear and guards that look like a Super Sentai version of Cobra Commander. Here we see Loki and Sylvie really working together for the very first time as they both use their powers of deception, Loki's shapeshifting and Sylvie's enchantment, to sneak past the guards onto the train to Sharu, a nearby city where the Ark is apparently located. Also, as confirmed by the end credits, the two guards they encounter at the train entrance are named Private Hudson and Corporal Hicks, names you may recognize from Aliens as played in that movie by Bill Paxton and Michael Biehn respectively. After scamming their way onto the Fifth Element meets Hunger Games train, which was teased in the series trailers, Loki and Sylvie finally get to know each other a little bit better. We learn just how deep of an effect Loki's adoptive mother Frigga had on him, teaching him magic from a very young age. And that makes this Loki's knowledge that he one day gets her killed during the events of Thor the Dark World that much more devastating. It's almost as bad as Sylvie knowing that she was adopted from the start and Loki only finding out years later.
No, I knew I was adopted.
What?
It's honestly one of the best scenes in the entire series thus far, thanks to its thoughtful yet quippy writing and the undeniable chemistry between these two incredible actors. We learn about the fireworks cantrip that Loki's mom used to cast for him as a kid, that Sylvie taught herself to enchant people, that Sylvie may or may not have maintained a relationship with a postman across space and time, which in my headcanon is a variant of Dennis from WandaVision, and perhaps most significantly that Sylvie and Loki are now canonically bisexual in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as confirmed by both the show itself and director Kate Herron on Twitter. Outside the MCU, Loki was also established to be pansexual in the 2019 YA novel Loki Where Mischief Lies. Although the two orientations are obviously not the same, this is a major step forward for queer representation in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which previously would only hint at LGBTQ characters obliquely, if at all. Case in point, the most visible explicitly queer character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe before this was Joe Russo's cameo as a gay man in Captain America's grief counseling group in Avengers Endgame, which isn't saying much. Now, obviously, there is still so much more to be done, but for now, Loki, one of the most visible and iconic characters in the MCU, is living his truth. So with that said, happy Pride Month, everybody. Hell yeah. Moving on, Sylvie wakes up from a much-needed nap to see that Loki has graduated from double-fisting space champagne to drinking Chekhov's gin. Loki has turned the train's bar into his own personal Asgardian karaoke room, singing in his native tongue in a much more joyous fashion than when Wanda Maximoff sang a Sokovian lullaby on WandaVision. As confirmed by the end credits, Hiddles McGriddles is actually singing in Norwegian, a song whose title I will definitely butcher, Jeg saler min ganger. I'm so sorry to any Norwegian and or Asgardian viewers, but please tell me the proper way to pronounce it in the comments below. I'm trying to be better about this. Now, one of the best moments in this scene is also a callback to 2011's Thor when Loki demands a refill by throwing his glass to the ground and shouting, "Another! Another!" Just like his beefy brother did back in a New Mexico diner during Phase 1.
Another!
Unfortunately, Loki is so drunk that he changed back into his Time Variant Authority outfit, and that Bail Organa cosplayer that was ahead of them in line for the train snitches to the guards, which leads to an all-out fight with Loki and Sylvie. We also get an interesting detail here that Sylvia spent her entire life running from those omniscient fascists that Loki works for. During the fight, things escalate quickly. Sylvie uses her horned headband as a makeshift weapon, which explains why one of them is likely broken off. And this also echoes Loki using his helm as a weapon during Thor Ragnarok. I guess they are variants after all. Loki proves why you should never bring cocktails to a knife fight, and then he manages to Sparta kick one of the guards out of the moving train, only to be summarily defenestrated himself. Sylvie then in turn jumps after him, but before she does, we see a smattering of Asgardian runes on her ornate sword. They look to be equal parts gibberish and Elder Futhark based on my research, but I'll keep trying to translate them in the meantime. That said, if you know what they say, you know what to do. Tell me. I'm dying over here. And although Loki didn't fall for 30 minutes, he did manage to land on the tempad, breaking the device completely, much to Sylvie's chagrin. After an argument about hedonism, cooler heads prevail, and they decide to hijack the Ark to ensure it makes it off Lamentis in one piece. As they follow those convenient signs towards Sharu, Sylvie finally explained the secret behind her enchantment ability. She needs to make physical contact and grab hold of her target's mind. For stronger-willed targets like Hunter C20, she needs to create a fantasy from their memories, which in turn leads to the biggest bombshell revelation yet and confirmation of a popular fan theory, the fact that all the agents of the Time Variance Authority are actually regular people. They are variants plucked from Earth to preserve the sacred timeline according to the Timekeeper's will. They were not created by those unseen space lizards who actually might not exist at all. And speaking of which, if you want to know more about who's really running the show at the TVA, watch our recent theory video, which I will link to in the description below. Now, Hunter C20, for example, was a normal person who loved margaritas, and Sylvie had to pluck memories from long before she joined the TVA to get the stuff she needed. This means that somewhere out there, Mobius definitely owned a jet ski before he was unceremoniously ripped from the 1990s to work in a space-time bureaucracy. And I, for one, will be damned if we don't get to see him ride one by the series' end.
That'll be fun, though.
Yeah, it'll be really fun.
But back to the matter at hand. Our heroes find themselves in the swirling chaos of Sharu with just 5 minutes remaining until the Ark launches, and what follows is a truly breathtaking tracking shot inspired by Children of Men, according to Loki writer and producer Eric Martin. And while there are several cuts in the action, they're masked quite smoothly through transitional shots in a way that makes the whole thing feel seamless. In the background, we get a neon pair of eyes of Dr. T.J. Ecclesburg watching Loki and Sylvie as they frantically run through the moral wasteland of Lamentis, fending off guards and debris in equal measure. Loki really gets to flex his Asgardian muscles here by using his sorcery to repel a massive piece of debris that's about to crush them. While some might think that Loki is using the time stone that he seemingly nabbed from Casey's desk back in episode 1, I don't think that's the case, because telekinesis is actually a part of Loki's power set, and that's what we're seeing here. Now, with all of that said, unfortunately, our heroes are too late. Loki, Sylvie, and the surviving Lamentians look on in utter horror and despair as the Ark is destroyed by planetary debris, while Bonnie Guitar's Dark Moon plays over the end credits. And speaking of the end credits, if you've been paying careful attention, the photos of Loki on the desk keep changing each episode, presumably as the TVA tracks their whereabouts. And there you have it, folks. That is everything we spotted in Loki Episode 3. And now that we've reached the midpoint of the series, we have more questions than answers, but we fortunately have a whole bunch of theories that'll play out on Nerdist in the days ahead. But folks, with that said, in the meantime, tell me, what did you think about Episode 3? What did you think of Lamentis? Did you spot anything that we missed?
Nobody cares. It's the end of the world.
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com.